in the previous episode, so episode 60 of Asians Represent, we talked about sort of the Black nerd experience. We talked about, positive representation. And specifically, we spent a lot of time, like 40 minutes, talking about Piccolo, which I thought was really great. And I know it was a meaningful conversation because the first comment on the YouTube video when we put it out was a racist one, which means that we're going in the right direction. Because when you anger the racists, it means you're probably saying the right thing. We also, and I was just looking at my bookshelf, and I'm like, oh look, we talked about Chad from Bleach, which was honestly a great conversation because in the moment when we were talking about it, when I brought up the character, I was like, I know this character's not Black, even though we were kind of focusing on that for the episode. But when you folks and Navarre couldn't join us for today, but when you folks were talking about how it is the perspective of the outsider and it is one that everyone can align with and relate to, I felt comforted in having brought up that character because the conversation around Chad I thought was really great and I thought really served as a good companion to why Piccolo has been adopted by the Black community and why Chad was so appealing as hey, this is the outsider and their experiences are very similar to ours, and kind of shows that these communities can all sort of deal with just being eyed and being looked at and being kind of just treated differently. Now, for this episode of Asians Represent, we're going to follow up on that and answer the questions that our patrons asked that we did not touch on last time because, as Emma pointed out in our sort of pre-show sort of lobby, we kind of just get really into what we're talking about. And I think that's a part of the appeal of the show. But the topic was so important that it warranted a second episode. So for this episode, again, I just want to kind of step back and say this is what we're going to talk about. In the previous one, we talked about good things. We talked about Piccolo. We talked about Chad. We touched on some, bad things where Yasuke went wrong and kind of gave everyone a primer on hey, this is what we mean when we're talking about anime and why we think that the label of anime can be kind of reductive to the overall conversation of representation, particularly when we were talking about the shortcomings of Yasuke and shows like Cyber 6. And honestly, it made me really happy to see how many people responded to my tweet about Cyber 6 and how many people in the chat who watched it live were like, oh my God, Cyber 6. I literally have the Cyber 6 theme song in my head right now. That show is awesome. So I'm glad we got to do all of that. Now, for this one, we need to talk about the misrepresentation of marginalized characters in anime and manga, as I have some manga on my desk right now. And to set a baseline, I want to make sure that when we're talking about misrepresentations, poor representation, we're not only just talking about gross caricatures. Because when I was doing some research, Sister Crone was like, I cannot believe that is from a current series. That really caught me off guard. But we're not only just talking about those gross caricatures that kind of bring out that cringe and oh my God, negative reactions, but we're also talking about really reductive portrayals of characters. So we're talking about those characters that serve as a stereotype, whether it be visual, narrative, or that trope. Because blaxploitation characters and characters inspired by the blaxploitation films without any of that context of the blaxploitation genre are seen in anime to this day. So when we're talking about misrepresentations, when we're talking about bad representation, we are talking about a spectrum of kind of that goes from reductive all the way to just gross and overtly racist. Now, before we dive into any of the questions, because we have sort of 5 talking points that we're going to go after, I wanted to kind of start by asking our resident scholars, actually. We have 2 scholars. We have I will say, Stefan, I'm very proud to know you, but also I deeply respect how much you engage with folks on Twitter, because I can't do that anymore.
Yeah. I get it. Sometimes I get frustrated with them too, and sometimes I experience burnout just like everyone else. But I try on some. I mean, there are some people out there that just you're not going to reach no matter what. And those people, I'm like, whatever. Uh, but I try and at least engage with some people, at least on some level, in the hopes that even if I don't, get across to them, if I can just like put a little bit of a seed, that maybe may grow later, or more importantly, um, what I really hope overall is those people that are speaking up are probably the ones that are really vocal, they're really committed, convicted in their beliefs. But what I really hope is it's the ones who are in the middle, who are maybe on the fence, who aren't saying anything, who maybe read those engagements and maybe are shifted some. It's kind of something you'll never know whether or not it worked, but I hope that I like to think that maybe there's a few people out there who are just quietly reading these things and going, "Oh man, never thought about it that way." And I'll just whether or not that's true, I'll just maintain that illusion.
Well,
Look,
it's interesting because I hear a lot of people who say like, and the comments by generally like white people, white families, so when they're talking about like their super conservative racist uncle, it's like you still have to argue with him, not because you're going to change his mind, but because you're going to set the example for like nieces and nephews, other family members who aren't saying anything.
Yeah, it's
someone
like
has to stand up to that.
Yeah, like it's like when people like let their relatives say those things, it's like you're letting them say that. I mean, I
Yeah.
get their family, but you're letting them say that. Are you going to at least say something to them? Even yes. Also, you want to set the standard for your younger relatives, but also it's kind of like sticking to your own guns as a person. Like, hey, like cut
Mhm.
no corners. It don't matter who you are. You're gonna get that clap back, even if you are my best friend. I'm gonna be like, hey, you're my best friend, but you can't say that stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And I think that's a huge part, like letting people know that, at least, on some level, again, letting them know that that stuff's not okay. There are just people out there with like, yeah, I mean, I was chuckling over your post the other day, Daniel, where you were like, I made it on the red list.
Oh yeah,
And,
I did.
and I was like laughing. And, you look at that thing and you realize that here's this, this list that's out there that people are I'm sure aware of. And if you're not,
we'll put some context into it. Yeah.
But the fact that, we're dealing with people now who, if you look at that list, equate Black Lives Matter and wokeness with actual professed Nazis, both on the red list. And it's like, and Antifa, all lumped into the same like thing. And this is not, again, this is not new, right? Like today, you will hear people say, even conservatives will speak particularly about Martin Luther King. It's like his is the example to follow, right? He's the one you should all be following in your protest. He was peaceful and all of these other things like that, right? And you even get that from conservatives. But at the time, he is decried in newspapers, right? He is the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that Martin Luther King led, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, and the Black Panthers. All of those are considered black nationalist hate groups by the FBI.
Well, didn't he have like a 60-70% disapproval rating in the U.S. when he was assassinated?
Yeah, totally did.
He came out and he came out, and when he delivered his sermon called Beyond Vietnam, he gives this speech, and it kind of decries, like he basically said that I can no longer, essentially said I can't speak out against the violence of a young black man in the northern ghettos if I don't decry the violence of the largest purveyor or the largest purveyor of violence on earth, my own government. You know, he talks about if burning down a building is immoral, you know, if damaging property is immoral, then what is dropping napalm on people?
Mm-hmm.
And the day after he said that, 168 national newspapers across the country come out decrying him with articles about you need to be quiet, stay in your lane, you know, all of those things that, you know, if somebody says something today, they hear the same thing, stay in your lane, you don't know what you're talking about.
It's like, and it's funny when you showed us that list, it's like it just reminds me of that one quote from Community. Like the whole entire list is like that one quote Community. It's like, you know what? I can tolerate racism, but I cannot stand animal cruelty. And it's like, wait a minute.
Hold up.
Hold on a second. You know? Now, it's like looking at this list. It's like, wait, but
now that said, before we go too far to this rabbit hole, the reason why we brought up scholarship was because I wanted to introduce Stefan, who has clearly demonstrated why, one of the reasons why he's here. Stefan also a great orator, but also a scholar of the issues that we're going to be talking about today. And the other scholar that I had mentioned, Emma, also here. Now, Emma, you are not as active on Twitter, but I will say that but I will say that your presence is very much felt behind the scenes of this community and has certainly sent ripples throughout our community and beyond. And I know that you are working on a lot of projects behind the scenes that will have just as great an impact as Stefan's impact, because all of us bring positivity and change very differently, whether it be in the two other avenues that the two other guests are in. If you're present in a lot of streamed programming like Wally, if you are a talented voice actor, if you're a talented role player and storyteller, you being on screen is important. The characters that you make are important. The perspective that you bring here today is also going to be very different from Emma and Stefan's, which is also going to be very important to understanding why these sorts of misrepresentations happen. And the other end of it, you have folks like Liana who are producers of content. You are making games. You are hiring people. You are putting on streamed shows. You are sponsoring streamed shows. You are being conscious about the art that you have in your book and how characters from different walks of life are being represented in your game, Valor. And of course, Wally and Liana are both like huge anime fans, which is why one of the main drivers to bringing you on in the first place alongside scholars, because we have this mixed perspective. Now, that said, in the last episode, we mentioned at the very end, this idea of the American cultural exports of racism and how they hurt anime as a medium. That is the topic of this episode. And I gave it some thought and I said, why do we have this sort of normalized portrayal of characters of black characters and other marginalized folks in anime and manga? And I did a lot of research, and then the answer that I found, at least one of the simplest answers that I found that could be put in a tweet, because I think about that a lot, because a lot of people are like, I don't want to watch I don't want to watch a 2-hour podcast. I don't want to watch 40 hours of you reading Oriental Adventures. Just tell me in 240 characters why it's racist. First of all, the answer is never that simple. But in kind of doing some research about sort of how anime is hurt as a medium by these really racist portrayals, I found this video, and it was I'll put it in the show notes. But they had interviewed a whole bunch of influencers who are black and in the anime and manga sort of industry. And they said being a black fan of anime is like in one scene being super happy and elated and cheering, and then having to feel super dejected in the next.
Oh.
And that really hit me, because I was like, that is last episode summarized in a single sentence.
Yeah.
And then they were talking about how one of the reasons, and one of probably the most pervasive reason why these portrayals still exist is because of early Japanese access to Western media and how Western media portrays black people. if we think about early Disney and Warner Bros. And it really hurt to go and look all of that up today because I'm, health issues, but also like, I want to see this. I want to feel this. I want to see where this is coming from. And the conclusion I came to was in the West, our racism is kind of brought to the forefront in the media that we kind of put out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then that racism is consumed without the same sort of context by folks in other countries who then have this idea of, hey, this is what these people look like. And I want to, maybe for completely different, intentions, include a character like that in my series. And then a series maybe blows up or gets really popular or becomes very influential in the scene. And then we see these portrayals, these tropes kind of proliferate across all of these different series. And I wanted to ask not only our scholars, but also our fans, if that's a fair assessment to kind of set a baseline for the rest of the episode.
I think that is very fair assessment because really I've always felt like when it came to like the harmful portrayal of people of color in anime, like it always just loops right back to Western animation and how at the time when anime was being made, they were looking to the West for their inspiration, just kind of like how the West was looking to the East for inspiration. The West, they were looking to the West, they saw their animations like, yeah, that's how they do it. This must work. That's what we're supposed to be doing, right? So because that is what was done at the time, it kind of goes back to what Stan Lee always says.
Mm-hmm.
He says characters in Marvel were based on what we looked out the window. And that's what they were doing. They were looking out the window and seeing the status of animation at the time and seeing how like characters like us were being portrayed in media. And they're like, yeah, this makes sense. Let's just go with it. And you don't, and then it stays there. It just perpetuates within the culture. It doesn't, because they're not going to see it as a bad thing because they're going, yeah, this is what's popular. And then it perpetuates in the culture because a lot of times with anime, a lot of these guys, if they're legacy creators, they stay in the industry. They don't just make one movie and dip. They stay in there. So the techniques they have, their writing techniques, the story beats, it is ingrained into the culture so much that someone else is going to look at it. It's like, I'm going to use this, I'm going to use this, and I'm going to use this. And they don't realize that they are perpetuating something very bad and very hurtful in other cultures because they're going, oh, but Tezuka did a great series with a character in blackface, but the series is amazing. But the character's in blackface, but that's not a bad thing, right? And we're going, no, yes, it is. It is very much a bad thing. But they're looking at like,
but look at sales numbers.
Tezuka. Yeah, exactly. That's what they're looking
Same
at.
with Akira Toriyama, Mr. Popo.
Yup. Yeah, exactly. Like they're looking at that and going, that is how I can become popular. And I hate to say this, guys. Look at the first 3 volumes of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. That shit is wild problematic. All right. Like actually, even your precious stand stuff. My man's name is Abdul. His name is Abdul. Like they spell it as Avdol, but yeah, it's supposed to be pronounced that way. You had a character in part 2 called Smokey, who was a little black kid that they found in Harlem, and he was never seen again until the end of it. There's a lot of like racist stuff in it, but at the same time, Araki was kind of like shining a light on what media was like back at this time. But at the same time, he was doing a lot of stuff that was like, you're kind of leaning hard into how people view people of color at the same time.
Yeah, I think you have to look at a couple of different things that kind of go beyond just like this genre, right? The first thing is that Hollywood is and remains the dominant purveyor of entertainment globally, right? Everyone around the world is looking to Hollywood, right, for inspiration across the board. And that continues to this day. And I think the other thing you touched on that both of you touched on is that ideal of cultural context, right? A lot of people in Asia do not have the cultural context to understand why these things are problematic. There was just another one here recently. I don't know how many K-pop stars who have gotten into trouble for wearing braids or wearing swastikas or doing all of these other things, right? And then there's kind of a reverse thing of that, right? Like a lot of people like have this idea that because of what happened, that the Nazis invented the swastika, not realizing that it appears in indigenous cultures in the Americas and in cultures across Asia long before the Nazis screwed it up for everybody, right?
It's
but
yeah,
exactly. And so it's so you see it appear, but again, people, the problem is that where it becomes problematic is you see like a K-pop star in this kind of Nazi-looking uniform with a swastika on it, right? And they're doing that, or a death's head skull or something, and they're doing that without the cultural context because they see a picture of something and they think it looks cool. They see someone in a video, an American video, with cornrows or braids, and they think it looks cool, right? They don't have those cultural contexts to understand why that's problematic and why that is, and it gets very dicey, right? You hear people fly into a thing of like, well, this particular movie that is made in China or is a white savior narrative, and I'm like, well, we got to kind of back up sometimes and stop having this kind of paternalistic global policing attitude that America is famous for and say, well, just because there's a white person in this movie and just because there's a white person playing a particular role, that movie was made by a Chinese director. It's got an otherwise all Chinese cast. We don't get to say, hey, you can't have white people in your movie because you're an Asian director, right? We really need to sometimes assess these things. Obviously, we have those reactions like based on our experiences here in America, right, in our cultural context. But sometimes we need to take a pause and take a step back and say, well, is this really where we need to be applying these things or expending these things? Because again, I think for a lot of times it becomes again this very kind of paternalistic world police kind of like, well, we've reached this level of awareness in America, and so everyone should be where we are. And that's just not the case, right? Like cultures and societies are going to develop at different rates. And even though we have this like global cultural thing, and that's not to say that we shouldn't call these things out and discuss them and have conversations about them and try and make other people aware. But sometimes I think it goes a little bit overboard in trying to force other societies and other cultures into these things that we're aware of.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you make about the sort of the centralizing effect that our sort of global media consumption has, because we think like, oh, my perspective must be the global perspective. That's a really good point that you kind of bring into this. Like, so we've got like the idea of cultural exchange without context. We've got the idea of bringing judgment in maybe less than a culturally relative way, which is why it actually, I think one of the points you're trying to make is that it's really difficult to do it in a tweet when you have to have a long form conversation about context.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
Now I know, Emma, you also you teach a course like this at the university level about portrayals. I didn't intend on doing this, but I have Shaman King Volume 10 on my desk. I brought it out because I thought that it was a really good example of the opposite of the East, sort of bringing something from the East into the West and learning something new, because Shaman King was actually where I first learned about the Ainu, because of one of the main characters is an Ainu character. But at the same time, Shaman King also, from what I've understood, really embodies that these characters are awesome. I'm loving these moments, and then oh my god, Choco Love is a character, and that's a real character.
It's Shaman King is that series that goes you like, oh, we thought you being woke, but like, oh no, you're not.
Yeah.
And I think, all right, there's a lot.
Didn't the new anime kind of like really try and tone that down
It
too?
kind of did. It kind of did.
But I want to hear
like,
I want to hear Emma's point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in my brain right now because there are not things that need to be balanced. Like Stefan said, we still need to call these things out, but there are considerations for Japan that I think get swept aside, especially from a North American perspective, looking to criticize what they're doing. Part of that is like critical race theory is not a thing in Japan because critical race theory is based on like Black American experience and history and the politics. And so a lot of that's missing. But also, even outside of anime and manga, there are, and you can totally see this within both of those, though, is there are particular caricatures, highly exaggerated. There are character types. And I think for a lot of creators, the Black character has become a type. And so they totally take all of those stereotypes and we can't just blame America for this, even though American pop culture definitely kept it going for a very long time. But one of the other things that I've been thinking about here is just how far back some things go, and that there was already very fertile ground for some of these characterizations and stereotypes. And it's not all just American, it's not all just Western. Although clearly those are very big recent ones. But there's a lot to be said for a more transnational and very international perspective on Blackness that we see in places like Japan. And it's not all just coming from the US. So some things to consider is that Japan was, for a very long time, and still you'll see some of the really nationalist people pick this up too, they were really involved with the idea of like a civilized core and an uncivilized periphery, which they adopted from China. So this goes way back. And one of the ways that they would gauge civility or like level of civilization was skin color. So we get a lot of colorism across Asia that is separate of America in a lot of ways.
It still pervades to this day.
It's been there for a very long time.
If you go to Vietnam, you'll see people who will actually cover their face while they're riding their bikes so that they don't tan.
And that's a whole thing. And then you drop in on that early European contact and European traders coming to Japan with Black slaves and crew members. So we have like the Yasuke stuff going on. Yeah. And then we get the American influx. And by that time, Japan had already been exposed to minstrel shows and sambo and some of these stereotypical characters. But then, like we've been saying, never really have had to have a society-wide education system ingrained discussion about where those came from and why they're not okay. Because for them, they're almost just characters that exist and they're outside of a lot of other things. They're ahistorical, sort of like a tsundere. Like you have.
They're not necessarily even real, I think might be a good way to put it. They're a series of like codes and signals that tell you what type of character they are and what role they're going to play. And,
it's like the trope that is the red oni, blue oni trope. That a lot of people like to refer when anime. It's or I can even go even further. The 3-man band trope is something you will see that I saw, like I grew up when I was watching anime, that I would see all the time, where it was be 3 people. One the leader, who was generally the leader type. I like to punch and hit things. 2, you had the brains, who was the foil to the leader. I'm really smart, and I will, be the brains of the group. And then you have the heart, the fat guy. That's always is the heart is either the big guy, the fat guy, the jolly guy, because you equate hardiness with the size of your body, because that's how it works.
You literally
apparently.
look at Asuma's team in Naruto.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
really,
God.
that's it.
Oh,
100%.
God.
Yeah, that's it. 100%. Yeah. There it is, right there. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Asuma.
I actually, when you think of it, that's every single T3 team in Naruto.
Psychic damage against himself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fuck
Yeah.
that.
I just ruined your whole outlook of a series you love.
No, I mean, like, no, I think that mostly because for me, it was just like, damn, that was like a really powerful narrative moment when Asuma dies, but also, that Asuma's team embodies that to the
Yeah,
team.
it's such it's the heart, mind, and body trope that you see a lot of times. But that just goes with Emma said, is that a lot of times you will, whenever there are characters with it's like a character with dark skin, they're gonna go, oh, we know what they're gonna be. They're going to be the wild character. They're going to be like, and I'm not even talking, and like, just to go like talking about the colorism and how you said is a real protective thing. I'm not even gonna talk about Black people in Japan here. I'm gonna address not even an anime. I'm gonna address a tokusatsu series. So there was a series. I forgot what. Actually, it was never adapted in America. There was a series called Q Ranger, which is all about like zoo animals as the theme for this Power Ranger series. They were all zoo animals, and there was one who was a shark, one who was an eagle, and one who was a tiger, right? And they had this really unique thing where you would see 2 versions of them. You would see an anthro version of them, like on screen, like you see the shark girl on screen, you see this lion dude on screen, right? But then you would see them in human form. But when they were in human form, the shark girl, light skinned. But the one who was the lion, who was the wild one, dreadlocks and dark tanned skin with and it's like, whoa, wait a minute. You're looking at this, you're like, whoa, this is if you like, look at it, you're like, this is wild problematic, because of what they are implying. And that's like a very generalized thing you see, that characters in manga and in anime, the darker the skin they have, is that they are more powerful, or they are more wild. They have no control over their strength. They are not the leader type. They are the type that the person sends out into the field to take care of everyone. Another great example. We're going to go back to Bleach here. Let's look at the Arankar for a little second. Who was the most powerful Arankar on the entire Arankar on the team? It wasn't. We're all gonna look at Dreamjaw. We're gonna think of Uliko. Oh no, it was the big old dark-skinned one that they just dropped onto the field to take care of all the heroes. He was wild. He was unchained because he had dark skin.
And
that's
kind
of that animalistic association.
That too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important.
Very
nice. Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Emma.
Oh, sorry. And that's like another thing to factor in too is, when looking at the situation, you have to remember that like Japan and African nations have a relationship separate of America as well. There's a long history of Japan-Africa relations and how Africa is portrayed in the media. And that does get blended in because, America has its own and it's all going around. But a big part of that is the threat of African nations at one point in time to Japan's like trade relations and international politics. And this idea of like, the wild animals and bestial form. And also that we saw it in Yasuke, the early fascination with the fact that a lot of the Black people they were seeing were much bigger than the average Japanese person. And so it became this like terrible stereotype about like being inhuman. And this is something that Japanese racism does to other Asian people as well. It dehumanizes. So the Ainu for a long time were talked about as if they weren't human. They were, like it was a slur to call them Inu, like dogs. Like this is just Yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah.
They even touch like what you just said right there. Like they even touch on that in Shaman King,
They do.
where they do.
In all of his flashbacks and his
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, and
Yeah.
it's like a big character point. They were like, it was like this internal struggle that Honourable even had, whereas like, I can't give in to my violent tendencies. I can't become like this
Yeah.
violent savage fighter. I'm like, you're not. You're horror. You're the cute, fun snowboarder.
Yeah.
dude. What
snowboarder.
are
I'm
you
like, oh
talking
damn, you
about?"
got like the coolest. Like, yeah.
I think
But,
I
like,
think it really plays into like the ideas of, it really plays into these ideas, and you see this across. I mean, this is not unique to Japan by any stretch of the imagination. All over Asia, right? You see this problem with colorism. You see it in Bollywood. You see it in China. You see it in Korea, and you see it also in the commercials. Right there, you can find these horribly awful commercials, and there are these long-standing ideas that are not unique to any one place in the world. They are kind of a global, unfortunate thing that has gone on of anti-blackness and blackness being associated with evil and filth and all of these other ideations that are associated with that, and then lighter skin being associated with purity and goodness and all of this stuff. So there are countless advertisements all across Asian television and Asian billboards and Asian marketing for skin lightening
Skin lightening,
creams
yeah.
and other and other things. And you see it in, again, South Asia. You see it in East Asia. It's just kind of one of those very pervasive things that like goes across. But also that ideal of savagery and that association again comes out of those similar ideas, that kind of like primal fear of the dark, like what's lurking there, and this like animalistic savagery that something's lurking in the bushes. And that again is something that we see globally in colorism, not just in, we see it in South America, we see it in, just literally across the globe. This is kind of an idea that is certainly not unique to Americans, America's brand of racism, but or the West's brand of racism by any stretch of the imagination. It's just one of those things that we have to parse. But now where we have to, like, I think, connect that to with these ideas is again this kind of like dominance of Hollywood that is whether we like it or not, they are the leader. They're the ones that everyone looks to for inspiration and what's cool and what's hip, right? You can find I think again across Asia you can find movies and televisions and thing like that. While certainly everywhere in the world is doing its own unique productions, you will also find many productions that are mimicking what's being done by Hollywood, because that's they're the production leader, and those things then take these ideas just sort of like on the surface, just the visual elements of them or the elements of speech, mannerism, and dress, and then what happens is that black people become literal caricatures in kind of Asian presentations, and because what are they used to? What do they see us portrayed as in the West? We're the villains, we're the thugs, we're the lackeys. We are we're the cool guy.
We're the pimps. We're the hustlers. We are. That's what we are portrayed as in American culture, and then it just cycles back. Man, okay, those who are watching and listening to this podcast, we're not here to ruin your favorites right now, but I'm about to ruin your favorite right now. Okay, think about what we were talking
actually,
about.
I was going to say before we dive into that, before we dive into that, there was still one other perspective that I wanted to get, and that was Liana's. I want to hold on to that because I do want you to ruin some people's anime.
I will.
I want you to ruin some. I want you to ruin some fandoms.
Anime. I'm gonna ruin someone's
because I can't be the only one who's ruining fandoms on this panel.
I am going to break I want a thumbnail of me like Wally breaks anime.
I think if we all just do this, or send me a selfie or something, I don't know. But before we go into that, because I do want to talk about examples of this. I want to talk about examples of this sort of pervasive sort of stereotyping, this categorization of Black characters and other sort of marginalized characters into these sort of tropes, these categories, these groupings to support a main character. I want to talk about that, but I want to get Liana's sort of perspective on how this has become normalized and the origins of this and the sort of Western exports of these sort of portrayals of Blackness, but also sort of the exchange not only from like Europe, but also Asia to the West and Europe. But I want to hear your perspective first before we move on to that next one, because I want to make sure everyone here says something
to bring up. And with apologies to Daniel and Emma, I wanted to bring up caricatures. Our reading of it. Because the caricatures books were a
thought we were done with that
wonderfully horrible example of that going in the other direction. I remember reading through, looking at some of like the Mongolian-esque portrayals and being like, this is exported racism from China. Yes, Hollywood is a world leader and, you know, they are a huge cultural export. But you send something over there and then, you know, Japan will get their hands on it and they'll do some stuff with it. And then they send their work back and then that will... Like, it's a cyclical thing. Like, something, and I think people can forget this. American racism is very bizarre, for lack of a better term, in that it was, in many ways, there was a lot of very specific engineering done to kind of support apartheid.
It's very intentional.
Yes, there was
very focused, intentional, like cruel design, like societal design intended to portray certain peoples in very certain ways. The emasculation of Asian men,
they want to divide us. They don't want us united. They want us divided.
Yes.
But like that very intentional emasculation of Asian men, to make them seem like not sexy or virile or whatever, you know, with that very intentional end goal of preventing mixed race children. My existence shows how well that's worked, I suppose.
Me too.
Yeah. But and also just like you can still see some of the scars of those exports too. Like we mentioned the minstrel shows, which Japan, as Emma said, has had for a long time. I remember watching and very much enjoying the Bleach rock musicals. And those musicals had Tulsa.
Did you just break Wally?
I think so.
No, because I remember that. That's why.
And I was like, cool. They got a dark-skinned actor to play him. No, they did not. I then saw some of the behind the scenes, and it was a light-skinned actor whose skin they had darkened. Same for Zangetsu. I was much more appreciative of those musicals before I found that out. And that was just a thing, and that wasn't a problem. My Dress Up Darling, which honestly I adore that series. They have that sequence where she uses tanning cream to portray this dark-skinned character. I watched cosplay Twitter where a white cosplayer is like, okay, just understand this is not okay. And she got brigaded hard for doing that. Like she had to lock down because of how much hate came at her. And she was white. This girl was white, telling other white people, don't do this.
Yeah, but people don't like being told what to do, even if what they're doing is bad.
Yep.
That is Twitter.
Yeah, like our export of minstrelry, it has very, very specific U.S. connotations that aren't, again, always understood in other countries.
Spelljammer.
But it's still, it's still harmful. I think I saw in chat, like people mentioned the Major Kusanagi from the Ghost in the Shell.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
How for us diaspora people, it was like, are you fucking doing this again? And the Japanese audience didn't really see the point because they have their own
Yes.
media. They're used to seeing themselves in their own roles. So it's
Mhm.
like, oh, white lady doing our thing. That's kind of neat. Sure, why
Yeah.
not?
Well, and
Yeah.
that's a prime example. I think that one is another example of, again, this kind of like global world that we're now living in, where we're going to apply like what we're seeing, right? But that's not going to be the perspective of, because overwhelmingly Japanese audiences were like, oh cool, we get to have Scarlett Johansson too in that movie, right? And to us it's like this hugely problematic thing, and so I think we have this a lot of times, this knee-jerk reaction to these things that's problematic often, because we again, we're applying our lens to things, and again, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't raise these issues and we shouldn't talk about them and discuss them, but we need to be able to factor in how these other cultures like are engaging with this and feeling about this, and factor those things into our conversations when we have them, particularly when we're talking about looking at the way these characters are. And we're having to assess these things, like you said, this very kind of constructed racism that was designed to turn a class of people into a labor force, a dehumanized labor force, robots, essentially, for lack of a better term, or livestock, right? That's crafted, and even once slavery ends, everything is geared with the 13th Amendment to maintain that through the prison system, right? To still maintain that same thing. It's a very constructed thing, and like both Daniel and Liana said, to divide us, right? To portray the Asian man as kind of very effeminate and very docile and very weak, whereas for African American men, it is very much about we're the opposite, right? We're this these power hungry, mad, over sexualized beasts with these over sexualized characteristics and all of these other things.
Mhm.
Again, all in an effort to, one, create fear and otherness, but then also to create division.
Yep. It's like it's like the intent was never there to there, but when as it goes more and more into modern times, you see that, oh, that's the reason why these kind of things are put in it, because they're trying our best to keep people at odds with each other, so that if they don't realize, like, oh, wait a minute, they're the real problem here, so why are they trying to keep us divided? Why? Well, if we work together, well, you see what happens. So it's a very, racism is scary, y'all.
Yeah. Well,
Like,
I think we have
scary.
to like that's crucial, and I think
how
also
calculated it is. How like
yeah. Well, but also I think we have to take into account that like a lot of what we see in Asia is, again, these kind of core colorist ideas, but also a lot of it is just ignorance, right? It is that cross-cultural ignorance of not understanding when somebody puts on cornrows, what that means to someone coming from a Western context, right?
Yeah.
What that means, and I think there are certainly some portrayals that we see in Asian media that are like, oh, rough. But then there are other ones that are just obviously cases of ignorance, right? Where that person just, again, was mimicking something they thought was cool, had no idea of the context behind it, because like Emma said, they don't have critical race theory there, right? That's not a thing in Asia. That is kind of a uniquely American and kind of somewhat British thing, but overwhelmingly an American American thing, and a little bit into Canada that is focused on here. And even here, people on both sides of the debate get what critical race theory is wrong time and time again.
Mhm.
They have no idea what it actually is. They mess it up all the time. And I see people, like I said, both people who are trying to defend critical race theory and people who are trying to tear it down. They get it wrong so often.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and apologies for being disconnected a little there, try to deal with the Twitch chat as well. I have given Liana power.
I don't know what I'm doing with this power either. I'm trying to figure it out.
What is this power?
Liana was
What
the
is
baby.
this?
Now
On the
they have
other hand-
power.
Yeah, just all the power. I'll give power to all of you folks too if you want it.
Yeah, that's.
But
I got
go ahead, Emma.
one quick thing. We don't have to talk about this for a long time. Just want to put that out there that we keep saying people in Japan just don't know, which is in a lot of ways true. But there are also just straight up racist.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no, yes,
Some of
yes.
this stuff is
100%.
intentional
Yes.
and it is not okay. So we're not saying here that it's all
100%.
No,
Mhm.
yes, 100%,
Sparkle's
yes.
just misunderstanding. No, some of it's just straight up racism.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's important too to kind of draw that line where it's like, don't the broader context can explain something. It doesn't necessarily excuse it.
Mhm.
Yes,
And
100%.
it is worth talking. We have had these conversations that there is racism in Asian cultures. Colorism is a thing that exists within their cultures and is not just that
Yeah.
export,
Mhm.
like the oppression of the Ainu, or
Mhm.
like in Vietnam, there's that kind of that distinction between like the Khmer, the Cambodian peoples who
Mhm.
Or just people who
Share a
make
lot of-
terrible jokes like fancy and jungle Asians. Asian
Yeah.
people making that joke.
Right,
Ali
right.
Wong.
yeah,
God.
absolutely.
Yep.
Yes.
It's like Ali Wong wrote on Fresh Off the Boat, a groundbreaking TV series. First of all, side note, it really sucks what happened to Constance Wu on that show. That
Oh,
just came
yeah.
out. That fucking
Mhm.
sucked. But how did Ali
Yeah.
Wong wrote something incredibly groundbreaking? I got to see my childhood on TV for the first time in live action. How fucking awesome is that? And then have her go and release a comedy special on Netflix where she makes this really racist distinction between fancy Asians being people from China, Japan, and Korea, and then jungle Asians for people in Southeast Asia. It's a terrible joke. And it's hard. And I think the point that you were making, Liana, and all of us were making, is it's really difficult to look at the good things. And I feel like this circles back to even being like a black fan of anime. Looking at the good things, looking at that positive representation, and then having the whiplash of dealing with these stereotypes, these caricatures.
Yeah.
And then the third factor that we've brought into this conversation is also having an understanding of the context of where that may originate, even though it still isn't good in the first place.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I
It's
think
like-
that demonstrates how complex and nuanced these conversations are, and why we need to have these longer form conversations about them, because it's like you said, this is not going to fit in a tweet, right? These are these deeper conversations about really what is racism, how does racism manifest, not just in America but around the world, or how does colorism manifest, and all of these things, and there's a lot of nuance there when we start to get into a lot of these issues, where if someone in America says they didn't know that blackface was wrong, you're like, okay, wait, hold on, stop,
how do you-
stop what you're saying right now.
Yeah.
As opposed to that being said by someone in Asia, right? There's going to be considerably less chicks, especially given the context that that blackface has had different connotations in different parts of the world, in different cultures, right? And so we really need to engage in that nuance of having these conversations.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because there was Liliana talking about, especially femme characters darkening their skin. There's other complicated stuff like subcultures and movements within Japan, because I brought this up in chat that we're surprised we didn't talk about is Gyaru.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
just about to mention that. I was just about to bring it up. Yeah.
Very good to bring it up since I mentioned dress up darling earlier, because she is Gyaru. Like she's Gyaru.
Like you see those characters and I recognize them, I'm like, oh, it's a Gyaru. Sorry, Wally, what were you gonna say?
It's like because like I was gonna bring up the Gyaru culture, because one character that a lot of people on the internet have flocked to, have attached to ever since she appeared in the series. I'm going to talk about Rumi Ushigiyama, aka Mirko from My Hero Academia. Like the internet loved her when she showed up. Everyone loved her so much. They said, "Oh man, this badass person of color." I'm like, okay, let's rewind a bit and let's really analyze it. Here's the situation. Yes, she's a great character. She's really cool. She's really strong. But Hori did not come from a place of like, I want to represent Black people in this. No, she's 100% a representation of Gyaru culture, especially if you read the prequel manga, My Hero Academia Vigilantes. She is 100% a representation of the Gyaru subculture in every single form of fashion. And then you kind of tag in a lot of stuff that we said before, talking about how they represent characters with darker skin, how they are rebels, how they are wild animal-like. That's exactly her character right there. Yes, she's a rabbit, that her distinction is a rabbit. Yes, but her whole thing is she's this powerful, strong, bestial fighter. That's what she is. That's right down the middle.
Because she is a rabbit. She is an animal.
Exactly. But it's I'm sorry to ruin your favorites, y'all. I don't want to, but
no. I mean, add a layer to that of like, for those who don't know what Gyaru is, it's a subculture that really grew out of like Shibuya area in Tokyo. I think it started in the 70s and then was really big in like the early to mid 2000s and has really dropped off. But on the outside, to a North American person, it looks bad because it is young women darkening their skin, either heavily tanning or using creams. One of the big giveaways is if you see a character who's dark skinned with light lipstick on, or even white lips or white outlines around their eyes, that's a very typical Gyaru. Big hair, usually colored, or blonde is a big one. And it's like Jersey Shore in Japan. And I can't explain Jersey Shore at the same time, so just make that. But what's interesting is it's not seen as blackface or a bad thing. It originally came from a place of rebellion. So young women fighting back against the beauty ideals that were pervasive in Japan. So very light-skinned, black straight hair, minimalist makeup to no makeup, really refined and muted clothing, being very prim and proper. And so they just went the total opposite on everything. Big and loud, big hair, darkening their skin, excessive makeup. And they've looked a lot to America and American fashion to be the contrast to Japan.
Shibuya in general, a lot of the styles that come out of it take a lot of influence from America too. Like it's not just fiction. Like there's a lot of cultural exchange. It's a huge thing.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah. So it's like, you see that without the context of knowing the Japanese side of it, and it looks very different. It still looks bad.
Yeah, I think that kind of raises an interesting kind of point for me in this, is that when you look at and you know, of course, I'm sure everyone looked the link that Daniel shared of the 25.
Oh God,
black,
that I got
Oh,
so
yeah.
much whiplash from that link.
so much whiplash. But I think one of the important things that we can look at with that and look at with black characters across thing, and again, this is not something that's unique to Japan. This is true of art and animation in the West, right? If you look at fantasy art, right, all across, and you do a search for dark-skinned elves or dark-skinned fantasy characters, just in general, right? What you're usually going to end up with is you're going to end up with a lot of characters who are dark-skinned, but they are essentially Caucasian people who somebody hit darken on,
Yeah.
right? They
Yep.
do not have any sort of African features, right? There are those characters that do, and that are on that list that do, and I think it's important when we look at like that list of characters that are in both the West and in Asian animation, how they are portrayed when they have more like stereotypical African features, and how they are portrayed when they simply are essentially the standard sort of anime character, but
Mhm.
darkened, or the standard, you know, whatever we in the West, but darkened, right? We get, I think, some very different portrayals of those characters based on that, with some of the more awful examples of these characters being the ones who are going to have the over exaggerated big lips, the hair, the all of those sort of traits. Not always, but that seems to be the trend.
Yeah, for
It's-
I think we should give this a little bit of context to this list that we're talking about, because you kind of brought it up, and the
Yes.
audience probably doesn't know what we're talking about.
Yes,
I shared
fair.
it in our chat. I'm hesitant to share it in the show notes, but I'll kind of explain what it is. It's just on some anime website, and they were like, "These are the 25 best black characters in anime," and it's really bad. And then the person literally prefaces it with, "I'm not black. I'm afraid of being canceled, but here's my
Oh.
list anyways." And
Great
then
start.
literally
Great start to start up
great
anything.
start, and literally at like the top of the list, like within the top 10 are some of the most racist caricatures. Number two,
Sister Crone is number 24.
Yeah,
What the
with-
fuck?
right, and then like number 2 is literally Killer Bee from Naruto, the one we talked
Oh my
about.
gosh.
What we talked about
Yeah,
a
we talked-
lot in the last episode is being like, oh, the only black character, and he raps really badly, and it's just
Right?
I think that was okay. So I'm gonna go on a bit of a rant
And
here.
then
Dave.
number
I'm
9 is
sorry.
Mr. Popo. Like, oh
I-
yeah, one of the 25 best black characters in anime is one of the most obvious racist caricatures.
And I got to rant about Killer Bee for a second.
Do it.
What really upset me the most about Killer Bee, it was the fact that when they made the dub, they didn't even bother to give him a good flow or
Yep.
make his raps even better.
It's-
They just kept them as shitty raps.
Okay,
So I'm
do-
sitting
can-
here
do-
like, you had your chance to fix it.
I
but
don't
you
know who
didn't.
the
Well, like,
I don't know
even
the
in the-
voice
in the
actor, but that would have been
Japanese
a
version.
tough challenge.
Yes,
Even in the
even
Japanese version, a bunch of the characters are actually like, he's not that good.
Yeah, that's the joke. But
But it's still a
It's
racist
like-
joke.
it's a
Yeah.
it's like
It
but
makes
when
it
you say-
worse.
yeah, like when you say, "Oh, he's not that bad," it's like, "Oh, so he's a bad black rapper." You're telling me he's a black person wannabe? That's not good
It's not
at
better.
all whatsoever.
Yeah.
You're
Nope,
not
it's
helping your
not better.
situation. So I'm thinking, "Oh, snap! When the dub comes out, they're gonna at least try to make an effort." No, they don't
Nope.
even try
Nope,
to
nope,
make an
nope.
effort. That's what's even more insulting. It's like you had a chance. You had a little bit of a sliver chance, but you missed it.
Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
want to say, just kind of tangentially, and then I'll also remind us that we've got half an hour to
And we
answer
have questions to
Oh, yeah.
But it's interesting to see how hip hop is showing up with a lot more thought and respect in anime, because we recently just had this God tier season where we had 2 shows with back-to-back rap episodes that were fucking
God,
incredible.
and then the ending
Yeah.
credits to that episode. The ending credits to
Wait,
that
which
episode
shows are we
of
talking-
Kaguya was
Kaguya-sama
Oh.
and,
so good.
and your boy Kong Ming, which
both
had
on my list.
phenomenal rap
Phenomenal.
episodes with like very intense localization effort into like portraying them. Chica says fuck twice. It's amazing.
They talk about boys' love in a rap, and Chica says fuck multiple times.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
So do we want to answer some of those questions?
Yeah,
I
sorry.
guess
So
that's
I
where
was just
this is
thinking about your boy Kong Ming is actually on my list, and this was a reminder.
It's really good.
And actually,
Like,
Kaguya-sama
it-
is another one that's on my list because you keep telling me to check it out.
Okay.
But yeah, I think we should go into some of those questions. And apologies if there was some background noise. The laundry was on.
Nah.
Not my fault.
That's all right.
Now that said, so if I was muted a bit, that's why. Now we had a couple of questions we've already touched on.
Yep.
I think we have definitely. I mean, we could continue to ruin some people's fandoms. I'm totally on board. You know,
That's what
I'm
Twitter's
a bit
for.
of break hearts.
yeah, heartbreaker. If we want to continue doing that, I'm totally fine with that. Now, there is one question that I really think that we should do first in the event that we just kind of deep dive into it. I think this is the one to deep dive into.
Yeah.
And it's really a question, and it's very much a theme that we've seen in how the Black community can respond to this and be involved in improving this. Now, the question is actually came from one of our patrons, Ross, who said, are there any examples of Black animators or other members of the Black community consulting on or contributing to the portrayal of Black characters in anime? And I would like to extend this to sort of like manga, webtoons, and also like the cosplay community.
So one that comes off the top of my mind recently, my dearest friend Austin
Shout out
linked
to
to me recently a manga that just came out, that just been announced. This came out just recently. It's called Clock Striker, and it is done by Isaka Galadima. And the whole thing about it, the reason why they linked it to me is it's because it is a manga made in Japan, but the main character is a Black girl.
And she's an
It's
engineer.
a shonen series about a Black girl engineer. That's two things that has never, ever been seen in a shonen battle manga series. Is a Black
is
girl
this on the
main
Shonen
character.
Jump app? If so, I need to check it out myself.
This looks
Yeah,
awesome.
It looks fantastic, but it is legit just taking two things you've never seen in a shonen series as put them in the forefront. And I feel
What's it
like
called again?
Clock
it's
Striker.
called Clock Striker. And basically that's what I feel like is pretty much something like that is the first step to be taken. Like, just do it. Like,
so do you think the first step is a Japanese studio doing that?
I feel like the first step with it is, yeah. Like, yes, I feel like more Japanese studios, more Japanese publishing companies, more Japanese creators just need to take the risk. Yes, it could go bad. It could go horrible. But they just need to take the risk and put that content out there where they're going, yes, I want to have a Black person, an actual Black person be my main character out there, and just put it out there onto the internet. Put it out there into the sphere so that people can see it and they can consume it. And then they can go, if they can do it, I can do it. And then they continue the chain forward. Like, that's how I feel, is that the best way to make the change is be the change that you want to be in this line of media, and just do it. Like, it may go bad, it may go good, who knows, but just do it and put it out there so people can absorb it and want to do it themselves.
So you're saying that, and I think this kind of touches on a lot of the conversation from last week, our last episode, when we were kind of talking about, I don't want to put words in our mouths, but we were talking about like authenticity when we're talking about anime and, you know, bringing in an audience and why Yasuke needed to be an anime over just an animated series, even though being an anime was very much a risk that held it back.
Yes.
So you're kind of saying
yes,
same sort of line of thinking, right? You want like a Japanese studio, a big established one. We're talking about Shonen Jump, right? Putting out something where they already have a massive global audience, and because it's coming from Japan, you're saying that because very much like how we're talking about Akira Toriyama and spheres of influence, in industry spheres of influence are going to take these risks because of the success or hopeful success of Clock Striker, something like that.
Another good example of this would be Edge Runners, Cyberpunk Edge Runners. The main character is Latino. Like they make it a point to say, yes, this person is not white. They make it a point to say it is not white. But here is the amazing thing about it. The fact of his race does not define the character. That is the risk you need to take. If you really want to make a change and you want to make characters as the forefront, person of color characters in the forefront of your manga and anime, don't model the character around their race. Make the character, make their race and just that part of the character. Doesn't make them define them. But we need that representation so we can see this character that looks like us in the series. Yes, it can easily be, it's totally, you can swap out the race and left and right, but that's what we need to see. We just need to see it. That's all we need. And then it just gets our gears going.
May I bring up another example? It's one I looked at for conversation. So there's a recent anime by Shinichiro Watanabe, who, as we know, is very passionate about trying to portray Black people and culture well. The deuteragonist of Carol and Tuesday, the titular Carol and Tuesday characters, Carol is a Black woman, a young Black woman whose musical voice is I don't actually know how you pronounce her her stage name. I'm going to type it out, and if either of you or if any of you really know how to how she pronounces it, because I haven't actually heard it spoken before.
Right.
But she is a American Black singer who portrays Carol's singing voice, and she's a protagonist. You meet her father at some point, who is a Black man.
That's really cool that they have a different singing voice from the speaking voice, and they made efforts to do that.
Yeah, Carol and Tuesday is kind of interesting too, because it critiques a lot of right-wing anti-immigrant, especially in the second. And there's definitely some conflation, since Carol is from Earth, which has become just a complete hellhole, which we kind of already knew from the Cowboy Bebop universe, as they are a shared universe. So there are typically dark-skinned people who are running into big problems with the fascist Mars government over their over immigration and coming over. So it's kind of an interesting conflation of taking kind of like Black culture, Black appearances, but also adding in some of the more what we in America would typically consider to be Latin portrayals.
That's super cool. For the audience,
it's honestly a wonderful series. I really liked it. I certainly have critiques, especially with how the agender character is portrayed, which is the agender character is very like, you tried, and I appreciate that you're trying, but you did not do that right.
Yeah,
Watanabe has a habit of kind of like he's able to make the shot when it comes to like race in anime, but when it comes to gender, it's just tried, and
it's
at
a
least
bit
you
messy.
tried.
that's a whole other episode that we've already got planned. So it's a whole other episode we've already got planned.
I think that's one of those functions, unfortunately, and that's, again, this is a global thing of representation. That representation comes in stages, and there's going to be a crap ton of mistakes people are going to make along the way, particularly when represented marginalized categories are new, and they don't have a lot of material to draw from, and they just kind of go off of these either overgeneralized stereotypes of what they've seen or heard. But I think for me, I would love. I was going to say, to throw out there, of both of those are spectacular examples. I really hope that at some point RZA gets involved in a
oh my god,
I would.
oh my god,
doing
oh,
some kind of a
honestly,
some kind of an anime.
It shouldn't be an anime. It should not be an anime. RZA should be involved with a Chinese animation studio.
Yes,
that would
their
actually
animation
be very
is different,
true.
very different. Because we don't want to blend the we don't want to say that's a whole other thing.
True.
Chinese and Japanese.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah,
very true. Yeah, very true.
But
I agree.
but I do vibe with that. Like, I would love to see that crossover into the animation world, because we saw the live action film world work out.
Yes, and I think too, like, that would be a kind of a great notion in this idea that, again, we are talking about kind of this global exchange, right, that is going on right now, and there's influence from, certainly America is a entertainment juggernaut, but Japan and China are both doing a great deal of entertainment output, as well as is Korea.
I mean, we're seeing seeing overlap with the musical world now. I mean, Ed Sheeran just released a song for Pokemon.
Oh my god, that music video,
it's great.
Bawling my eyes out.
And he's a fan. And he's a fan. Like, it's
like
not
the fact that Lil Nas X put out a song for
League of Legends.
For League of Legends is like, that's something I would not have expected, especially since like back to back they were strictly K-pop, and this like now is Lil Nas X. It's like,
well, they had their first big
song
musical
too.
number was Imagine Dragons.
Yeah, that's right.
They've been doing that for a while.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay, so I like the idea of like music, and for clarity, to go back to the Shinjiro Watanabe series, it's not, because I had never heard of it, and I was like, it's Carol and Tuesday, not Carol and Tuesday.
Carol and Tuesday.
Carol and Tuesday, just for the audio listeners.
They're basically a indie band, a two woman indie band.
Yeah. Now, so we've
got
got
that on my list.
It's really charming. Like, I highly recommend it. Honestly,
it is. It's a great show.
Like, don't expect it to be perfect, and it's kind of schmaltzy.
Also,
I mean, what is right?
Like, I love it.
Also, if you're a fan of pro wrestling, that line from Botchamania is from Carol and Tuesday. If you are the listeners, if you know Botchamania, you know what line I'm talking about. That's from Carol and Tuesday.
Like I say all the time on my Twitter feed, progress, not perfection, right? Like, none of these things are perfect, and we still have to like critique them and take them at the thing. But it's always nice to see that progress in one way or another, even if it fails in others. It's nice to see. It's nice to see them getting rid of, so long as they're not like completely throwing another marginalized group under the bus. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Twitter in all its wisdom loves to castigate those who are not perfect, and
yes,
but that's the rage. But that's the thing. Rage gets attention. Rage and the negativity gets attention. See it all the time. Like, shout out to like one of the best people out there, like Tanya DePass, Cypher of Tier. Like, first of all, Tanya is. I've had the chance to work with. I've been working with Tanya on like 2 projects for the past 2 years, and Tanya is like one of the realest people ever. But Tanya has. I've seen Tanya tweet this, and I've talked about it on the podcast. Tanya has said, when something bad happens to me, or when I tweet about it, or when I tweet about something like negative going on in the world, it gets tons of attention. But when I talk about something positive or something that I'm doing that's not related to that sort of negativity, people don't pay attention to it. And Twitter reinforces that, like, in order to grow, in order to engage with people, because you want that dopamine, like, I'm going to be negative. And I'm not going to be constructive, because constructive doesn't even help as well on Twitter.
And the algorithms on all social media feed that, right? Because they put the negative things that people are going to doom scroll in front of them, because their goal is to get you to scroll past as many ads as possible, right? Yeah. So they want you as locked in and as engaged as they want. And what engages people more than people going, "Oh, you buy this," or and commenting. It locks people in, or commenting on those things, and it locks people in, and so the algorithms feed that, and it creates this sick this, vicious cycle where it's the awful things that are pushed to the forefront, and it's the people that are saying the very nasty and controversial things that have 5 million followers or that are trucking in those sort of things. I mean, I'll be frank with you. I don't have a ton of followers on Twitter, but I'm surprised I even have the number that I do, with the fact that I try and inject nuance into what I'm saying. It just shocks the heck out of me daily, because I'm like, there should be like 2 people following me based on the way the algorithm works.
Nah, I think there should be more people following you because of the knowledge that you're dropping.
I would like the most viral I've ever gone with honestly, like, intentionally, I was trying to be very positive about like this tweet thread about like, white people love co-opting Asian stories, but why? Why do you not feel entitled to your own? And like,
yeah.
Oh, if you ever want to see white rage on social media in a really hilarious way, and I'll find it and I'll send it to you. There's this creator that I follow on TikTok, and she is like, so she's like a creator of color, and all she does is she makes videos pretending to be a white person, but like doing what white people do when they find like our foods and make it their own. She goes to like Costco and is like, I found this, and it's like a hot dog, and just tries to do what white people do to our food, and it just pisses people off, and it's hilarious.
The term
well, that's ruin. Amazing.
Ruin. I'm gonna find it. I'm gonna find it, and I'll share it with you folks.
Oh my gosh.
I gotta find it, but I can bet I'm like just
that's
like laughing
hilarious.
at it.
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
do you want to try and hit more questions?
Yeah, well, I actually want to hear Emma's recommendation as well, and then I have one too. But I want to hear Emma's recommendation if you got one.
Not off the top of my head. I go through a lot of phases where I just rewatch the same things for familiarity. And a lot of the older stuff does not have great representation. So
okay.
that's yeah.
I've got one. It's because I saw in our Twitch chat that folks were also asking about video games. And we've been talking about this exchange between the East and the West and West and the East.
Yeah.
I want to actually recommend a game that's currently in development called Sword of Symphony. So Sword of Symphony is being created by a black indie developer. And you look it up right now. I see you folks looking it up. Look up Sword of Symphony, and it is essentially an action RPG based on orchestral music inspired by Japanese action RPGs.
Oh,
and it's made by a solo dev who is literally doing this in their bedroom, and they post progress about it on like TikTok.
Is it what Stephen didn't do?
Oh,
yeah,
nice.
Yeah,
nice.
And yeah, it is. If you are into games, if you are into like Japanese pop culture, and you want to see examples of this exchange done in a really positive way, look up Sword of Symphony. That is my recommendation. It looks so cool. It's a day one buy for me.
That does look really interesting.
Yeah, and like they release a ton of sort of like short videos about like, hey, I've done this musical system.
Also,
I've done the jumping.
Like an action rhythm game.
It's an action rhythm game where you make or set orchestral.
How could you do this to me?
You make combos, and it just looks so cool. It's like if you like Devil May Cry, Kingdom Hearts, and you want like an indie game but with like European orchestral music made by a black creator. It looks sick. So that's my recommendation. But
I want to real quick before we move on. I just want to point out something that just happened that I think is really important to highlight, because we all like everyone here this happened and no one commented on it. But I think it's super important to point this out. Emma just a minute ago said, I'm watching all of these older things and they don't have the best representation. And we just kind of continued on with the conversation. And I think it's super important to acknowledge that, because a lot of what people accuse, like what we do and what Daniel does with Asians Represent, what a lot of us do on Twitter, is that we're trying to like destroy or discard all of these things that people enjoy or love. There's nothing wrong with going back and watching all of these programs that we all grew up and love that have horrible representation.
We talk about it all the time.
Problematic elements,
Yeah. the audience
people-
knows
yeah.
what my favorite TV show is.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
Office.
yeah.
It's my favorite
Yeah.
TV show. And
Yeah.
there's some bad stuff in it.
I mean,
Yeah,
TV's
and-
just Mr. Popo in it, and we spent how many
Dude,
minutes talking
like,
about
exactly.
My favorite anime of all time is Kinnikuman. Man. That is a really racist
I don't know that
series.
one.
That's
Yeah.
a really racist series, but I fucking love Kinnikuman Man so
Yeah.
much. But it is really, really racist.
It's not great.
And- yeah,
It's
What
also
is
and
what
we
is it?
can't-
What is it
so
called?
weird.
What is it called?
It's called Kinnikuman Man. It was
It
called
just means
Ultimate
like
Muscle.
meat man.
It's called
Oh,
yeah, it's called
Ultimate
Muscle
Muscle.
Man.
Oh, I know Ultimate Muscle.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
but it is, the original series is really, really
Mhm.
problematic and super racist. But oh my gosh, I love reading that series. I will read that series like 100 times. But no, it is bad. It is very
I think we can't say that enough to like
Oh my
that, like,
lord.
that, like that we have to give these critiques, but that
I don't
but
even feel
that-
comfortable
just
sharing
because
that.
we're critiquing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a rough one. It's a rough one.
Yeah.
yeah. Like
Amazon
just
man.
remember that there was a character called there was a character who's a major player in the show called Ramen Man. I am
Yeah.
just gonna leave it at that. I will
Yep.
just leave it at that.
I know
Oh.
this series mostly because there is a Jamondogu based character.
Yeah,
So it's like, that's my time period. What are we doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
Whoa.
there's, I don't know. It's nice to see better representation, more of it.
Yes.
Also, it's hard because we're talking about like, what do we want to see? It's like, well, in a certain way, it doesn't matter what we want to see because we're a North American audience.
Yes.
But we can
Very true.
ask Japanese creators in the industry to be
Yeah.
better and do better, particularly
there-
because,
there
and I
are-
said this
and-
last time,
yeah,
there
there
are
are
Black
creators who
Japanese
want to.
people.
Yeah.
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 This
And I
isn't
think we
just
can-
like an American audience thing. There are Black people in Japan that need this.
I think
Something
we can hope that we can at least kind of let Western productions know what
Yeah.
we want to see and the type of representation we'll see, and then again there will be some of that reverberation of Hollywood then carrying that forward, and that translating into other parts of the world, and I think we are at the very edge of some of that. We are starting to see some of that happening. I've definitely started to see some changes in not just in anime in Japan, but I've started to see it in some productions in other parts of Asia, in Bollywood and thing where they're again not perfect. They're not
Mhm.
anything to sing praises about, but they're getting better.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
I feel like there's an interesting thing going on, kind of going back to the wrap episodes, like the really good ones. Like, it feels like as people, like as creatives are like, wait, no, like this shit is awesome. They will more genuinely engage with it, and then you will have more pure and respectful art. So
Yes.
part of it is dropping a lot of the barriers and filters, which the internet has done wonderfully in some respects, and
Right.
letting people like experience things unfiltered, so that they want to go to the source,
Mhm.
so they want that authenticity, not because they feel like they have to, but because it's cool and they want to do it right because it's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
the more that's there and the more cool it seems, the more opportunities. And this, I don't know if this is fully related, but I have wanted to say it because I was kind of thinking this about Yasuke and how we kind of ripped on that series. And it's something we've talked about on Asians Rep before, about Asian creators creating things like how it's not necessarily great, but like, why does it have to be? So just taking a risk on
Yeah.
a more diverse group of creators and productions, and then not
Yeah.
expecting it to have to do like 100% all the time.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like when I see it's kind of like going back when we talked about it before. It's like, yeah, just because it's Studio Mappa doesn't mean it's gonna be perfect,
Yeah.
It's like it's like, yes, they will tout the name of the studio because that's what's gonna draw the names, but if you don't tout like who actually made it,
Yeah.
it's kind of a very telling thing that they
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
say who made it. they'll say the production studio, but they won't say the creator.
Yeah, and
That's a really good point, I think, that you're making, because just to go off on a little tangent, I just went last week to see The Woman King, week before last, sorry, to see The Woman King, and I think like there's a lot of criticism coming for that film about how it is not historically accurate in the way it portrays Dahome's relationship with slavery and some other historical inaccuracies there. And that's absolutely true. But I will also argue that film is less about Dahome than it is about female empowerment, and it's speaking to audiences today, very particularly about female empowerment, and particularly Black female empowerment, greatly more so than it is trying to tell a completely accurate historical narrative.
yeah. And like, you don't have to like it for it to have value. So like, I didn't like Yasuke, but I 100% think it should exist, and that it's important that
Agreed.
Yeah.
that's there.
I agree. Like,
Yes.
it was it good? No, but we need stories
we
like
need-
that.
and we need
it.
more. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Stefan
Also,
said this
also
right.
regarding
Go ahead.
the Woman King, like how many positive portrayals do we have of like George McFucking Washington and Thomas Jefferson?
100%, exactly.
Y'all are allowed at least one.
That are
Yeah.
completely
You know,
that are completely ahistorical too, right?
yeah,
That like
absolutely.
tons of them. They're everywhere, right?
You know,
And
it's
yeah.
we are allowed. We are 100% allowed our like movies that we are allowed to have our Last of the Mohicans and our Last Samurai movies. We are allowed to have them. Let us
exactly.
have them,
So-
you know?
so I think-
let us have
Our
our
Tequila
totally historical
Gundams.
accurate movies.
So I want to make a point here that I think is super important for us to stress. A lot of this, I think, Stefan, you made a really good point of saying progress, not perfection. Really important thing
Yes.
to understand.
Mhm.
At the same time, though, I know that there are a lot of us who, as marginalized people, we're not allowed to make mistakes. We literally opened up the last episode by talking about how we're not allowed to make mistakes.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
tends to, at least from my personal perspective, tends to prime us for not wanting to see mistakes because we're not allowed to make them,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And
it's because
I'll say this, like this was my reaction. And I know a lot of folks like privately, I didn't tweet about this or anything. A lot of folks privately I talked to about this. But when all that shit came out about Satine Phoenix, my
Yes.
first thing was like, us Asians, we don't get to make mistakes like that. And Satine Phoenix was like
Right.
one of the biggest Asian creators in tabletop gaming space. And my
Yes.
reaction was like, fuck the community. Like, first of all, like what happened to all those creators? Fucking awful. But also like wider, it's just like the Asian community. It's like that was like one of the people who a lot of Asians
Yeah.
looked up to. Right.
It-
So
That
Right.
reaction of like you just fucked us.
you
for
just
all
fucked
of
us
How
over.
could you do that?
Right?
It
It's like
was-
it's the same
Yes.
reaction to Shang-Chi. It's like the first Asian superhero's got to be a kung fu master. God damn it! Right?
Yeah,
that was my
right,
reaction.
right,
That was my
right,
reaction. But I'm
right.
like
Mhm.
I'm still gonna buy Shang-Chi merch because I want to speak with my dollars. Right?
Yeah.
It's
Yes,
the same thing
yes.
with like so that's the whole Satine thing and how I feel about that.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Emma. Like Yasuke needs to exist. People need to
Yeah.
take risks. Consumers also not only need to point out when things are wrong, but also point out that
Yeah.
things need to exist in the first place.
Mhm.
That's
That's
the
the thing, like,
that's the
it's
important
there.
little add-on. It's
I
like
gave it a try, and I was like, why does it have to have these
Yeah.
things?
yes,
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
you tried. Here's where you didn't succeed, but right,
I
let's
think
like
also
let's
kind
learn
of
from
part
this.
Of it is like if it's something you really wanted and it's a letdown, sometimes your reaction is even stronger.
Yeah.
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 And I
Here's-
don't want
yeah.
that reaction to be
Yeah.
taken as
Yeah,
these things shouldn't be out there, because
Right.
unfortunately
Yeah.
those takes get
Mhm.
picked up in the algorithm.
So
Yes.
And
They do.
here's
Netflix and other places really listen to that and then just shut it all down.
here's one of the biggest most high I would say in recent sort of memory, one of the biggest examples of this, and it's the Eternals. The
yeah.
Eternals
Yes.
is a huge example of big change, big risk, really positive representation on a movie that probably should have been a TV show.
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
Yep.
And Disney needs to know that, like, there are aspects of that movie that are extremely important to people.
Mhm.
Right?
100%.
And
Yeah.
even though the movie isn't great, and even though maybe Chloe Zhao's filmmaking sensibilities didn't match with what people were expecting of the MCU,
Yes.
that doesn't mean that Marvel should stop at Eternals
Yeah.
1,
I liked
Yes.
it.
right?
Yeah.
Also, Blade was in that fucking movie.
Yeah.
Blade was in
Yeah.
that movie.
There was also a
Don't
Deku.
don't make me cry because there's rumors swirling around that.
Yeah, oh,
well,
Blade
the
production is in
director,
trouble, so-
well, the director
yeah.
of the Blade movie had to leave because of scheduling conflicts because I think
Yeah.
things have been dragged on.
Yeah.
My only
and then also
concern about
apparently
Blade is
there
its
are-
rating. That's my only concern.
there are reports that the script only has 2 action scenes and that
Mhm, yeah,
the
they're
lead
saying it's
actor's
pretty
not
mid.
happy. That he's not happy with the way it's
Mhm.
going before they even. But anyway, I think Daniel, though, one thing you touch on that's really, really important. I think you touch on an important thing that kind of goes across the marginalized experience. And when you were mentioning it before, the first thing that popped into my mind were these images that were all over the news and that you'll still see in retrospective sometimes of African Americans cheering at the O.J. Simpson verdict.
Oh my
When
gosh.
O.J.
yeah.
Simpson was found, and like, and the way it gets contextualized a lot of time in the mainstream media is very different from what was actually going on there. Where all you really had was this essence of African Americans really being thrilled that fuck yes, we won a court case finally, right? Like, in a high profile one. It didn't have anything to do with the actual particulars of the case,
Yep.
but the overall kind of systemic issues of the justice system in
Yeah.
America, right? And
Mhm.
and it goes back to these kind of ideations of as marginalized peoples, we are put in these kind of positions where we're kind of cheering for things that may seem like odd things
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
that we're celebrating.
I mean, we saw
Because-
that very recently with the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. They both seem
yeah.
like really
That
bad
was-
people, but a lot
so
of folks were like, yeah, men can be abused too.
It's because the thing is,
Right.
like, with the O.J. Simpson thing, is like, did we know he did it? Yeah, we knew he did it. The entire
Yeah.
black community knew he did it. But guess what? A black man got over the white justice system and lied his way ass out of a court case. So we are taking that as the biggest
That's a win.
ever. But we're like,
Yeah,
oh,
that's a
no,
win
no,
for
he
us,
did
like,
it.
right? Yeah.
He did it. But we are taking this win after
Yeah.
so many years of it. We're taking this win. No, it's a
Yeah,
It's-
and we're
it's
like,
an-
yeah, it was awful, it was messed up. But how many black people right now are sitting in jail for things they did not do? You know?
When Johnny Cochran died, we joked about it, that there was this like tension of the black community of like, shit, there was that. No, it's true, because he was so far the only black lawyer that ever did that for us. So we're like, oh boy, we don't have another Johnny Cochran anymore. We got
That's the thing. You don't get many of these moments, and that was the
Yeah,
point,
you
right?
don't.
You don't get these
Yeah.
moments, and you kind of have to pick and choose, even if there's some negativity in there.
Mhm.
Honestly, the mainstream reaction to that whole thing is very like white racist people being
Right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
racist.
Yeah, but now,
Yes.
now that said, we have run out of time. I believe that we have actually touched on all of our questions in one
In
form
one way
or
or
another.
another.
We have
Yeah.
definitely, over the past 4 hours of conversation, gone over all of those 5 questions, which honestly I'm really happy we did. I think that even though we framed this as like a wall is going to break your heart sort of episode, or this is like, hey, we're going to talk about some negative things, I think we ultimately, this was a positive learning experience for like me, I'm sure for the rest of you, for our audience.
Yes.
Because really, this is a conversation about nuance, context, and the importance of praising positivity, calling out negativity, but at the same time being constructive about calling out negativity. Because I think
Yes.
ultimately the answer to how can we have better representation, whether it be black characters in anime or Asian cultures in campaign settings like Karatur, is us speaking up, but actually taking action and showing how we can come to these solutions.
Yes.
Now, I again want to thank you for joining me for this episode. The door is always open on Asians Represent. If there is ever an episode that and I know Liana, I know we've already got some episodes lined up, and we have a whole other thing we're going to talk about. But to the four of you and to Navarre,
locking Daniel in a room and making him.
No, we can't talk about that. We can't talk about that. We can't talk about that yet.
Making him permit me to talk a lot at him about things I think he should be doing.
I'm not okay. I want to clarify. Liana and I always talk, but this is like Liana is sitting me down to me like, you are listening to everything. So this is I'm really excited. I mean, I'm on board with what we have planned as we speak very ambiguously about this thing. It's just a logistical thing that we have to sort out. But yeah, I'm really grateful for all of you and for Navarre. I actually had a really great conversation, and I want to talk about it on the podcast as we kind of end this. I had a really great conversation with Navarre the other day, just about like getting into the tabletop games industry and finding your niche, and people who you could trust, who are allies, and about your intentions with joining an industry where there is very little money in tabletop games compared to the rest of the games industry. And a lot of people who work in this industry do it for the passion and because they love it. And also because, I mean, obviously you can run a business very successfully in tabletop games, but also people do it because they want to see games that they didn't have when they were kids. They want to inspire the next generation. And so when I see folks who are really bringing cool shit into the industry, like I'm on board to signal boost that. I'm on board to talk about Valorous games every single time I can. Every single time anime comes up literally on this podcast, I talk about Liana's game. If it's like somebody asks me, oh, like, do you want to like cultural consult on this thing about Japan? I'll say no, but you know who might? Emma. Or like if somebody's going to ask me for like, okay, you want to do an anime episode? I will, of course, still ask John, but I know that I've got Wally here, and I know that Wally's got some incredible perspective to bring. I would not have learned as much about, Piccolo's adoption in the Black community if not for Wally. Like, I'm really glad we met. I also love that you wore a DBZ shirt or just a Dragon Ball shirt. I can't see
I
if
just
there's...
really like this shirt.
Yeah, I don't know if you planned that.
No, I got this shirt at. I got this shirt at Old Navy of all places.
They do some. They do some like they do have some good shirts. And like if I am looking for somebody to have a really nuanced and especially like historical perspective on how people are portrayed in media, I'm gonna talk about Stefan. Right? There are like lots of good people in tabletop RPGs, and while we talk about some negative things, we always talk about how to be better and how to be constructive. Yeah. And the reason why we're able to do this is because of our amazing patrons. We have some awesome folks who really support us, and there are a lot of patrons, and I want to put all of their names in the show notes and on YouTube. So I'm going to put all of the patrons' names on there because there's just too many. And honestly, I'm kind of getting a little emotional over this stuff because this is like a really good episode. So I'm sorry I didn't do like a sort of a patron outro like I usually do, but I'm really excited because I'm a little distracted because I'm thinking about Clock Striker. Because
that's good stuff.
I'm super excited to just kind of put my money into it.
Not on the Viz app. It needs to be there.
I'm gonna fucking buy it. Like I'm gonna buy it when it comes out because honestly, like not only did like Emma, you mentioned like the Black community in Japan, but also I'm thinking just about like all of the young kids who are gonna read that and be inspired to go into STEM.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool because I don't know if there's an anime or manga series out there that does that. And
the closest we have is Dr. Stone. Dr. Stone is the closest we have to it.
Yeah, and I think that's not as it's not going to be as impactful as something like a shonen series like this. I know Dr. Stone is shonen, but like
Dr. Stone is shonen edutainment.
Yes,
it's a lot of fun, but it's very clearly edutainment.
But not like Clock Striker is just going to pure inspiration. It's going to be the Dragon Ball for a new generation. I really am hopeful for that. And that's why I'm kind of all up in my feelings right now, because I'm like, I wish I had that when I was younger. I wish I had the adult me just has Glenn from The Walking Dead, although like I'm super hyped for that. But like, yeah, I'm just super excited about Clockstrike, and I'm just really grateful that you brought that up, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but that said,
one of these days, Daniels, we should do an all Asian adventure archaeology adventure.
it's gonna be so boring. It's gonna be so boring. It's gonna be like we're gonna stand on a hill, and there's just gonna be trees and bushes everywhere, and we're just gonna hope that this is where the site is. And we're gonna spend 3 months digging, and then realize that it's not there. Or you're gonna be like me, and you're
screening backfill.
Yeah, or you're not gonna realize that like 90% of your work is actually not gonna be in the field, and you're gonna be in a lab looking down a microscope, which is what I did. Right? I spent a lot of time in the field. I actually spent a lot more time in the field than most people. But like still a lot of time in a lab, or like a lot of time in like a warehouse alone, sorted through dusty bags of pot sherds. Or if you're like
you just brought in a wound here.
Yeah, you just really brought in a wound here. Or my most embarrassing my most embarrassing professional archaeology moment was thinking that I found a sword.
Oh no!
While I don't know if Emma's definitely heard me talk about this. Emma's heard me talk about a lot of embarrassing archaeology stories. But I'll tell this.
When you say the most, I'm like,
this is not the most, but the most is not appropriate for this podcast. But this one is academically, intellectually also it's a wound that I have. So on a dig, I thought I found a sword, and we were like, I have a picture. I'll share it. I think I might have shared it on my Twitter recently. But I was like 8 feet down, like I was deep, and we had been excavating a house in this town called Madaba in Jordan, and the square that I was supervising, we had like basically in the exterior section, like basically the porch of an Iron Age house, and the door had been barricaded by rocks, and we couldn't actually excavate past the door because there was a walking platform on the site that went underneath the door, and there was a mosaic above it from a different layer, a different strata. And if we had excavated the door, we wouldn't actually be able to, and I know my camera got blurred, we wouldn't actually...
It's like too much archaeology.
I know. We wouldn't actually be able to study the mosaic above it. So there was this mystery, and it still is to this day. But outside the door, we found things like human teeth, like arrowheads. And so in my mind, I had this really dramatic picture of like they barricaded up this door. There was some conflict, like how archaeology is portrayed in the media. And as we were digging, I found a piece of corroded metal that I thought was the hilt of a sword. And I was really excited. So excited that I called the director of the dig over. And I may have made too big of a scene about this. And I said, as I do, I'm very bombastic. And I was like, I think I found something awesome. Up until this point, I had found some really cool things. Like I found a little bone D6 that's actually still in a museum. It was a Roman D6. I found like some cool pendants. I found in China once, I found a figurine that was definitely like a very that had big boobs. And I got it. It was a very buxom figure. And I got into an argument with an archaeologist there. They were like, "Oh, it's an animal. It's for shamanism." I'm like, "These are boobs." But anyways, I called the director over and I was like, "Okay, I think I found this. I think I found a sword." And then they called everyone over and they were like, "Okay, we're gonna do this thing." Long and short of it, like painstakingly kind of like uncover it, and it's a piece of fucking rebar. And so if you're an archaeologist, like the implications of this are like heartbreaking, because it means that like the entire layer that we were digging in was contaminated by modern garbage, and what we found there was basically meaningless.
Yeah.
And So like it happens all the time. Like I've had like colleagues who find like big oil drums like inside there as they go down. But like for me, it was like I called everyone over and then showed everyone my mistake. So yeah, we opened up a wound. We opened up a wound apparently to end the episode. But if we want to do an archaeology one, we'll definitely make it real dry. It's like roll to
you
apply.
want to see archaeology conversation?
Roll to apply for funding.
Oh my god!
But with disadvantage.
Disadvantage every
With
time.
Disadvantage and making it count.
And it's just like every marginalized character at the table, roll for funding, but only one of you gets it. Like it's it'll trigger a lot of people, including myself. Apparently.
Academia.
Yeah. And
Yep.
that is why I left. But that said, I want to thank you for joining me for this conversation, especially you, Liana, for bringing up these old wounds. But no, I really appreciate all of you. I appreciate the conversation. Again, big takeaway from this episode. This is from Stefan, and I will always quote this as a Stefan thing. Progress, not perfection. Representation comes in stages. We will make mistakes, but it's important to not only critique, but provide constructive feedback on how we can move forward. That said, thank you everyone for joining us for this episode of Asians Represent. Thank you to my guests, socials, all of our amazing patrons who, support this show. I'm going to put that information and credit you folks in the show notes and the YouTube video and on the audio feed. That said, thank you everyone. You folks, thank you for joining me. Let's do this again.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Bye everybody.